Welcome to another episode of the Residential Developer Podcast. I'm the host. My name's Nathan Battishall, and today I'm going to talk about how to get the best out of your development application. Over the course of my career, I believe I would have been involved in close to 2,500 to 3,000 development applications to council. And look, I've seen times where the DA process has been very smooth. And I've also gone through times, and it's probably been the last couple of years where I've just seen a really challenging time in terms of the processing of development applications. Now, look, I think if you are in the space of investment development, it's important to understand the process. For me, a good investor and developer should always be engaging great people to lodge and manage your DAs, because I think it's key to have good people looking after that space. As you always hear me talk about the fact that you don't want to be a micromanager. You don't want to be someone who is trying to push things yourself. But I still think it's important as an investor and as a developer doing residential projects to understand the process and to be educated on the process, because I think some people have unrealistic expectations on the process of a DA. And I think a lot of people have a naive view of what can and can't be done in terms of an application. And look, this isn't going to be a council bagging session, because I think, look, everyone's got their challenges. I do have moments where I do get frustrated with the process, but the reality is the process is the process, and we're at this point in time we're stuck with it. And I'm a big believer in you've just got to keep a positive mindset. Because at the end of the day, me complaining or whinging about how slow a council is or how frustrating a process is, it does not change the fact that that is the process and that is what we are currently facing. And I think the more we have a mindset of understanding it, yes, it's not right sometimes, but I think the more we understand it, the greater the ability to have a really clear head and not to overwhelm ourselves and not to put unnecessary or undue stress on ourselves when we had an expectation of something going through quicker or thinking we could slide something through when it may only just put pressure on us and stress and things that just deplete from our mental, emotional health and deplete from the financial health of a project too. So that's why I'm very big on making sure you have contingency in time as well. And it's something I know I probably harp on it on this podcast, but for me, a lot of people don't factor in the contingency of time. Now, time is often very costly as well when it comes to doing a project, because with interest rates the way they are, a lot of investors and developers have to use private money, or they have to do projects at a higher interest rate. When they don't factor in adequate time and they don't put contingency on time, it leads to frustration, it leads to stress, and it leads to loss of profits on a project. And I think that can be overcome by making sure that you mitigate your risk, that you factor in additional time, and that you factor in elements, especially around a DA, that there are things out of everyone's control. So the DA process, obviously it's a development application and you're dealing directly with council. We do a lot of fast track. We encourage a lot of fast track CDC approvals these days, but often to get the best yield on a site or the best outcome on a site, or sometimes it's just not possible at all without a development application through council. And there are ways to do your DAs that can really give you a better chance of a faster approval or give you a better chance of a favourable outcome when it comes to your submission. And I think, look, first and foremost, it's key to work with people who've worked with that particular council and get an idea. The great thing about today is that you can literally go through you can research how long DAs are taking with a particular council. If you're doing a dual occupancy or you're doing a multi-dwelling development or a type of development, get an idea over the last 12 to 18 months, how long is that council taking? Just because a town planner told you, oh, look, probably around 6 months, or you'll even call council sometimes, and council are probably more reluctant these days to give you timeframes. Some council staff are great in terms they'll give you a conservative number, but some will sometimes give you an unrealistic time frame of how long a DA is taking. They might tell you, oh, look, it's taking anywhere from 3 to 4 months, but then you go and do your own research and you'll see that the average DA is taking 11 months. Well, you know straight away that feedback you've been given of 3 to 4 months is completely inaccurate. So you're better off looking at the average DA and then add a little bit of contingency on it. Anything on top of that then is upside, it's bonus. But then you've got to look at, okay, you might look at the history of DAs and see a lot of DAs, there could be a lot of DAs, for example, taking 10 months. But then you see a particular firm, whether it be a design firm or a town planning firm, that seems to be getting a lot of them through in 6 months of the same type of development. Could be the same type of mix in terms of multi-dwelling, or it could be dual locks. So then you can do a bit of research and you can find out, okay, why are they getting their DAs through 3 months on average quicker? And don't just look for one, but look for a history, a trending history of that. There could be a reason why, and a lot of it can be due to the fact that there could be a highly experienced team. They could be a team that just have a great relationship with that council. They've taken the time to understand and know how that council ticks, understand what their pet peeves are, the things they do like to pick on, the things they do like to look at. Looking for a firm that documents the plans and all the documentation comes the way the council likes to see it to avoid unnecessary RFIs, requests for information. There's so many little things you can look at just by doing your research and understanding and making sure you're going in with your eyes wide open. And we talk a lot about due diligence in terms of finding a site, but also it's important to do your due diligence on that council. Do your due diligence on the things they really push back against, but do your due diligence on the community too. Is that particular suburb, is that particular street a street where there's objections, a lot of objections? You could have a great site and it could be a site that's really highly profitable, but you might look at that street and say, look, there's been 4 projects that have gone to environment court that fairly well complied, but were littered with objections. It could be an area where it's quite political. It could be an area where people are quite affluent and they're happy to throw money at lawyers and different people to really make noise and to push back. So it's important to go in with your eyes wide open. I've seen a lot of people where they've gone and bought a site, they haven't researched the area, they haven't researched the fact that even maybe that site's had 2 DA rejections on it previously. So a lot of people get excited. They've bought a site really cheap. I need to realise it's a really tricky area to get approvals through. So all of a sudden, because they didn't do their research, they didn't do their due diligence on the site, they didn't do their due diligence on that council, on that street, on that neighbourhood, a lot of that could be avoided. I've seen people, and I've rightly supported people walking away from a deal because it carried too much risk in terms of the ability to execute a timely approval on that site. It could have been due to the reputation of that council, or it could have been just due to the fact that that particular area, that neighbourhood or that street is an area that is highly strung in terms of pushback on projects and on developments and on that type of project or development. So it's very key to look at that. But look, when it comes to actually preparing the application, I always say to people, if you want a great outcome in council, it's important to really respect and take into account the controls that they've set for that area. If you want to push back, if you want to go for variations, if you want to go that way, that's fine. But just make sure you know what the type of things that council are supportive and not supportive of. Some councils are supportive of particular variations, but there's things that are just often going to give you pushback and are going to slow the process and delay the process, and some will lead to a rejection of that DA. Others will just lead to a very slow process during that RFI response time. So often if you're constantly pushing the envelope, you need to be aware that if you're getting requests for information, that's going to take time because council's going to have to prepare that request for information. Then they're going to have to give that to you or to your consultants. Your consultants are then going to have to address those RFIs. So there's often redesign, there's often additional documentation. And once you've got multiple consultants involved, you then need to get those things moving. Often people may need to apply for extensions on the variations because the changes might be quite either unnecessary or they could be changes that are quite extensive, which means redesign. All of a sudden, your designer or your architect might need to redesign the project, which might then trigger redesign from your stormwater engineer. Your town planner might have to start to prepare variation statements and update their report. And then all of a sudden you've got your landscape designer and your thermal assessor and all the different moving pieces, traffic studies and all the different things that can come as a result of that RFI can add up. And next thing you submit that RFI back, then it's got to go out to all the relevant parties within council, and then they'll assess it. Sometimes they could have a backlog, so all of a sudden it could sit there again. And again, that can just chew up time. So even when you are looking for a site, look for a site that can you get a good, clean outcome with a fully compliant design submitted to council in an area where there's limited pushback, in an area the streetscape is going to suit. And all these things can really help. And I think by doing that, you put yourself in the best position then to get a great outcome. There are times where pre-DA meetings are vital and necessary and helpful for a project. Since COVID, a lot of councils are pushing back on pre-DA meetings for smaller developments. Some councils don't even let you do a pre-DA meeting for example, a dual occupancy or even a small 3 or 4 pack townhouse development now, which is unfortunate because the beauty of a pre-DA, and pre-DAs can be helpful, sometimes they're not helpful. The advantage of a pre-DA is that council will take minutes. You'll get all the people in the room, provided they all come from council, and you're able to navigate through some challenges, to be able to pose some questions to council around maybe particular variations you're wanting to run with, and get minutes and get feedback from council, and at least know when you're then going back and preparing your application for your DA that you know some of the non-negotiables that council are likely just not going to push back against. So again, you can submit an application that addresses all of the concerns or addresses the feedback that council came back with from that pre-DA. And then you can remind council that you had that pre-DA, that you've addressed the minutes, and that can often help an application process. So look, that's a really key thing. The beauty of the pre-DA meetings these days, most councils now, pre-COVID, you generally had to go into council and meet with planners, and it was sometimes tricky and difficult to get all the people in the room. So you get excited, you get into the council pre-DA only to realise that the engineer isn't there, the traffic people aren't there, the arborist isn't there, you've only got one planner, and then all of a sudden questions that you had relevant to those particular areas are not able to be addressed. The beauty of the Zoom meetings or the Teams meetings that most councils in New South Wales do now is that it's a lot easier to get all the people in the room or in the virtual room, so to speak, and that you can really just tap into all of that knowledge, get that feedback. And again, it just saves everyone time, saves the developer having to travel. If you live away from that council, you're not having to travel. And the consultant, you're paying less money often too, because consultants aren't having to travel from their offices to those meetings. It's just as simply in the comfort of your own office or home, you're able to jump into those meetings. So that's another key and a vital piece as well. And I think just making sure that you're building a good relationship with that particular council, and just understanding how that council's wired, how that council works, and just becoming good at dealing with councils. I think clients that work with a similar council or the same council over and over, you get to know how that council ticks, how that council thinks, but also get the right consultants who know that council and put trust in those consultants. For me, having great town planners, building designer / architect is key. People that know that council, work with that council on an ongoing basis. And the best way to determine their experience with that council, ask how many DAs they currently have within that council. Ask them for their last 5 or 6 DAs how long they took within that council. Now, if that consultant says, oh, look, I've never worked with that council, well, you're running the gauntlet. You're running the risk. If that consultant can give you a list of successful projects that they've been able to execute within that council, well, again, that really helps you gain confidence in knowing that you're on the right track. So, look, there is an art to preparing successful DAs and applications. A lot of it's in preparing really good documentation that council can read, is legible. So council isn't coming back because there's a lack of information or there's missing information. Like architecturals in Ride Council might need completely different documentation to Wollongong Council, to Central Coast Council. Every council's slightly different in terms of what they want to see, in terms of what they want documented on their plans, even just having well-written and executed statement of environmental effects. I'm amazed the amount of people that don't want to get a highly skilled town planner to prepare this documentation. For me, well-prepared documentation, well-executed documentation and approval drawings that are fully compliant, or if they're not compliant, have a really reputable, skilled town planner prepare variation statements that make sense, and that it can really paint a great, clear picture that you are not trying to, you're not trying to do the wrong thing. You're not trying to push every little boundary. You're just trying to create a project and an outcome that looks great in the area, that is compliant, one that's not going to have an adverse impact on neighbours, on the community, and one that's going to create a really amazing livable space and a product that council and that vendor or that future buyer can be proud of. So, look, there's an art to doing development applications. As someone who's done a huge number of applications and been involved in a huge number of applications all across councils in New South Wales over the course of my 20 plus years in this industry, I can tell you now that there is something to be said of putting an application in that is valid and helpful. And I think one of the things I found, the biggest problem you will have in an application is when either the developer has unrealistic expectations because they haven't done their due diligence, or because people are trying to push the envelope too far. They're trying to achieve something that is realistically not possible, where they haven't engaged the right people prior to the acquisition of that site. So all of a sudden they're having to do something and move the impossible, or try and achieve something that, yes, could likely be done, but is going to take time to achieve it. So if you're going to push the boundary, make sure you factored in additional time and additional expenses too for potential variations and time delays. If you're holding the land on finance, well, you need to factor in the interest rate. You need to factor in the additional costings and that sort of thing. So I think although most investors and developers across your lifespan, you're likely not going to be heavily involved in the actual submission of that DA, I still think it's highly important for anyone with a passion for doing projects to get a good, clear understanding of the process, not so you can micromanage your team, but so that you can make great positive decisions on the acquisition of your site, but also so that you're not running yourself with stress during that process, and understand that, hey, we are in a world now where DAs are taking a lot longer. I remember when I first started my career, we were getting sometimes DAs through in 1 week, 2 weeks. You could actually meet face to face with the planners. Often they'd even come on site. They'd bring the engineer on site. You could have a good chat, sort it out, and they'd virtually give you the verbal approval there. And within a week or two, they'd write up the approval. Those days, sadly, are gone in most councils. But this is the nature of what we face now. Complaining about it won't improve anything. Although it is good to have events sometimes, the reality is this is what we face, so we need to become experts at understanding it. We need to become people that preempt what could come up and become excellent at actually submitting applications that get the best outcome when it comes to a DA approval. So look, I hope you enjoyed this short episode on understanding the DA process. Look, if this is something you enjoyed, feel free to reach out to us. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out. And look, I want to encourage you to share this with friends, family, anyone you think might be interested in doing a development or doing a project. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next week.